Good afternoon. The time is now 3:30, so we will go on and get started. Thank you for joining us today for our public workshop on Air District Rule 4550 Conservation Management Practices, where we will discuss potential amendments under consideration. We're conducting this meeting via Zoom video only. We will do our best to facilitate a smooth meeting. We will have a staff presentation first, followed by public comment. You may have noticed that this presentation is available on the district webpage where you found the link for the Zoom meeting. So you can find a PDF of our PowerPoint slides there if you care to follow along or just refer to those slides later on. Before I begin, I do want to review some important guidelines and general instructions for the meeting. Please silence your cell phones and desk phones. This will ensure that we do not hear any feedback that can interrupt the meeting. During the meeting, only district staff will be visible. Members of the public will be asked to unmute themselves when they are recognized to make public comment during the public comment portion of the meeting. After the presentation, staff will announce that the public comment period has opened. Staff will recognize any public attendee who has indicated they wish to speak. And so how do you do that? On the Zoom video application, you will see a button that says raise hand at the bottom of your screen. So press that button so that you can be recognized to speak during the public comment section. You will be asked to unmute, so unmute yourself at that time, and then you will be able to provide your comments. If anyone is attending via phone, I have special instructions for you, but looking at my list, I don't see anyone participating by phone. So you can message us if you have questions, but I think everyone's just participating by the app, so I won't give those instructions. You will also have the option to submit public comments during this meeting by sending your comments to webcast@valleyair.org. I am monitoring that email box during the workshop, and I will read those comments out loud during the public comment period. We also have an email address we'll provide you at the end of the presentation where you can submit comments to district staff at any time about this project. So with those instructions out of the way, I am going to introduce Ross Battercher, Senior Air Quality Specialist here at the Air District, and he's one of the staff working on this project. I will share the presentation and give the floor to him. Actually, I won't. Host disabled participant screen sharing. So Stephanie, if you're there, could you please enable me to share my screen?
Yes.
Thank you. There we go. Does that look good?
Can we go to the presenter version so we don't see the slides on the left, so we get full screen?
Maybe. My apologies. Let me try this again.
We'll get there. Perfect.
Great. Go ahead, Ross.
All right, thank you, Jesse. And everyone, welcome to our public workshop for potential amendments to District Rule 4550. That's conservation management practices. Next slide, please. All right, great. The first slide here is to provide some background on the challenges the Valley has with air quality. We have unmatched challenges because the combination of geography, meteorology, and topography. We are in a bowl. We are in a valley with mountains to the west, east, and south. We have meteorology that often places a lid on top of that bowl that can trap emissions, leading to high levels of ozone and PM 2.5 throughout the year. Because of that, we are designated as extreme non-attainment for the 8-hour ozone standards and serious non-attainment for the PM 2.5 standards. Therefore, we need significant emission reductions that go beyond the already strict rule limits to get us into attainment of those standards. The comprehensive strategy in the 2018 PM 2.5 plan includes commitments to reduce emissions from mobile sources and a number of stationary and area sources, including agricultural operations addressing direct PM 2.5 and NOx emissions, with NOx being the primary precursor to PM 2.5. Next slide. Right. Now for some background on Rule 4550. This rule was first adopted in August of 2004 as a PM10 control measure. And this rule was the first of its kind in the nation. It was approved by EPA in February of 2006 and was determined to meet best available control measure requirements. This rule established a unique menu approach of control techniques to accommodate a wide variety of agricultural industries found in the Valley. Through this program, selected CMPs are listed on application forms that are submitted to the district for approval as a CMP plan. Those approved CMP plans are enforced through on-site inspections, and operators are required to submit applications to modify plans when changing their CMPs. Next slide, please. Now, this rule is applicable to on-field farming and agricultural operation sites within the San Joaquin Valley. CMP plans are required for farms with 100 acres or more, or confined animal facilities that exceed the listed thresholds for the number of animals. Through this rule, operators are required to maintain records verifying the use of approved CMPs. These rule requirements have reduced PM10 emissions by 35 tons per day, which represents a 24% reduction from this source category to date. Next slide. All right. Through this program, there are several CMP categories, including land preparation or cultivation, harvest, unpaved roads, unpaved vehicle or equipment areas, manure handling and storage, overall management or feeding, open areas and feeding, and other. Next slide. In regards to CMPs, the practices can include practices that reduce or eliminate the need to disturb the soil or manure, practices that protect the soil from wind erosion, equipment modifications to physically produce less PM10, applying water or dust suppressants to reduce emissions entrained by moving vehicles and equipment, reducing speed or access on unpaved roads and equipment areas, and lastly, alternative practices to open burning. Next slide. All right, since the adoption of this rule, the district has worked to implement this strategy and worked extensively with stakeholders to ensure compliance and overall program success. The district created a special CMP application form that includes simplified checklists to ensure a streamlined application process for operators. Additionally, the district hosted a number of workshops to assist sources with compliance. The district has made a number of notable achievements since the adoption of this rule, including receiving over 8,500 CMPs since 2005, in addition to over 7,000 CMP modification applications. These practices encompass 3.23 million acres of farmland, and the CMP program received EPA Region 9's 2005 Environmental Award for Outstanding Achievement. Next slide. All right, now we're going to cover California's Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, or SGMA, and the other resource management considerations. Now, groundwater has been regulated in California for decades. However, the state's assessment concludes that groundwater has been overdrafted in recent years. SGMA was enacted in 2014 to establish a framework for ensuring the long-term reliability of groundwater supplies. SGMA established groundwater sustainability agencies to implement groundwater sustainability plans for groundwater sustainability by 2040 for critically overdrafted basins. The majority of the valley is considered a critically overdrafted basin. Now, there are other regulations that overlap SGMA, including the Williamson Act, which preserves farmland through contracts between landowners and government agencies, and also the Federal Endangered Species Act, which impacts the management of fallow lands. And while there are safe harbor agreements available, they are not widely utilized, I should say. Next slide, please. Now, it is key that we work together to understand and address the impacts of SGMA. The ongoing severe drought and SGMA implementation pose severe challenges to the San Joaquin Valley, and a concerted effort is necessary at the local, state, and federal levels to support transitions such as water storage and recharge, working land maintenance, and economic impacts, among other considerations. Due to the tremendous challenges facing our region, the district is currently working with agricultural researchers, stakeholders, and agency partners such as NRCS, or the Natural Resources Conservation Services, and CDFA, the California Department of Food and Agriculture, to evaluate the feasibility and effectiveness of conservation practices on fallowed land to mitigate potential PM impacts from disturbed acreage through amendments to Rule 4550. Additional research in close coordination with agencies and stakeholders is essential to continuing to identify valley-specific and sustainable solutions. New strategies must be supported by strong education and outreach efforts. And these new strategies must be supported by new state and federal funding, given the vast amount of land anticipated to be fallowed and the significant costs. Next. Now, the district has identified potential CMPs for fallow land. These are approved practices, and you can find out more information by looking up the NRCS codes included on this slide. So the CMPs that are under consideration are crosswind ridges, crosswind trap strips, cover crops, woody residue treatment, crop residue management, surface roughening, range planting, conservation cover, and conservation tillage. Now, there are some other potential CMPs that are under consideration, but because of issues like availability of water, they are under further review. And these include field windbreaks, wind barriers, the Farm Service Agency's Conservation Reserve Program, and strip cropping. All right, for the next steps, district staff are analyzing the technological and economic feasibility of these practices, taking into account costs, cost effectiveness, and considerations depending on specific conservation management practices. The district will also consider the cost and feasibility of the most effective practices available, as well as the requirements in other air districts. A socioeconomic impact analysis is being conducted by a third-party consultant to evaluate the regional economic impacts of the proposed amendments. Also, the district hosted a public scoping meeting in December of 2021, and there will be ongoing opportunities for public input through the rule development process. And this includes regular updates at the Citizens Advisory Committee, the Environmental Justice Advisory Group, and at district governing board meetings. And just a note here on the steps involved in the rule development process. So we start with the workshop today. Then we will host another workshop in the first quarter of 2023 where we can share rule concepts and get additional feedback. Eventually, we will publish the proposed rule for review and public feedback before it goes to our governing board for their consideration in 2023. And as mentioned before, public participation and comments are invited throughout this process. Next. And I, Ross Badisher, am the main point of contact for this rule project. If you have any questions or comments throughout the rule development, I can be reached at the address, phone number, and email listed here. We also recommend you sign up for the email listserv linked here for updates on future public meetings or the posting of documents. I'm going to hand it back over to Jesse Firo.
Thank you, Ross. At this point, we will enter into our public comment portion of this workshop. If you would prefer to email your comments to us during the workshop, you can email them to webcast@valleyair.org, and I will be monitoring this inbox and will read any comments received there out loud. As Ross just mentioned, we invite you to submit comments directly to Ross at any point during this rulemaking, and we will also be opening the floor for people to give their comments now. To do so, you can raise your hand on the bottom of the Zoom screen, and you will be called in the order those hands are raised. In the interest of time, we will probably not be providing detailed responses to your comments, but we'll take all comments under consideration as we continue through this rulemaking process. At this time, please raise your hand if you would like to provide a public comment.
I do not see any indication of public comment.
There's one now. Phew, there they are.
Our first comment is from Noel.
Thank you. Go ahead, Noel.
Okay, now, am I coming through now?
Yes.
Perfect. Noelle Kramers with Wine Institute. And I was just, I may have missed this earlier in the presentation, but wondering about with the fallowing practices, if a farm fallows an X number of acres that drops them below the 100-acre limit, like, are they not subject to the rule? I guess I'm just wondering about how fallowed acre, like, does fallowed acres, are they considered agricultural acres under the rule moving forward, or do they get pulled out? I'm just kind of trying to figure out how that would work under the proposal.
Well, that's one of the things that we'll be looking at, is how to delineate between acres that are followed and what would be done on those acres versus what would be done on the other acres, and what would bring someone below a threshold. So I don't have an answer at this time. We will address the issue in future workshops.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I saw another hand up earlier. Last call for public comments. There we go.
Our next comment is from Manuel.
Go ahead, Manuel. We cannot hear you yet.
How about now, Jesse?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, if I would read the screen and learn the electronics, I think I'd be better off, right?
You got there. Go ahead, please.
Okay, on your CMPs from the well, I wouldn't say CMPs, the NRCS practices that are being held by NRCS, all of them are backed with research and science for the various PM and 2.5. Can you hear me?
Yes, I wasn't sure if you were going to keep going. We are reviewing all the background information on each of those measures to make sure that they are backed by science and would work well in the Valley.
Okay, all right, okay, thank you.
Our next comment is from Jesse.
Go ahead, Jesse.
Hi, this is Jesse Roseman with the Almond Board. Is the update to the CMPs just for fallowed lands, or are you looking at other sorts of dust control measures? And I was thinking in particular, there's low dust harvesters that have maybe been developed since the last CMP.
Our primary goal in this rulemaking project is to review measures for fallow lands. There are opportunities to add new CMP measures outside of the rulemaking process to account for new things that become available.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
The next comment is from Roger.
Thank you. Go ahead, Roger.
Yeah, somewhere early on in the presentation, it talked about working with CDFA, and I can't remember exactly how the comment was put, but that the practices need to be backed by funding. Have you guys started those conversations with CDFA and NRCS in terms of where that funding is and how much we would be talking about in terms of actual incentives?
Those conversations are in progress, and we don't have dollar numbers available today, but we definitely recognize the importance of getting some answers there.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments before we close the workshop? All right, and I'm checking the webcast email and I don't see anything there. Thank you very much, everyone, for taking the time to join us this afternoon. And if you have any comments or questions later on, please do email them to Ross Badacher. Thank you for attending the workshop. That now concludes the public workshop on proposed amendments for CMPs.